The Republic, once a beacon of democracy, has been plunged into chaos by the rise of the Separatists, led by Count Dooku and his military commander, the ruthless General Grievous. The Clone Wars have stretched across star systems, pitting the clone army of the Republic against the seemingly endless droid forces of the Separatists. Amidst this turmoil, Senator Padmé Amidala of Naboo works tirelessly to advocate for diplomacy and peace in the Senate chambers, though her efforts are often overshadowed by the demands of war. Unknown to her colleagues, Padme bears a secret that could shatter her carefully constructed life. She is secretly married to Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, a bold and powerful warrior who has risen to prominence in the Clone Wars. Their love, born in the fires of conflict and forged through shared trials, has been kept hidden due to the Jedi Order's strict code against attachment and emotional entanglements. Yet, despite the secrecy, their bond has grown stronger as the war drags on. Anakin, however, finds himself torn between two worlds. His loyalty to the Jedi, who raised him and trained him, conflicts with the depth of his love for Padme. The weight of his duties as a Jedi weighs heavily upon him as he leads Republic forces into battle after battle. He longs for peace, not only for the galaxy but for himself, to find time to be with Padme without the constant threat of war looming over them. But he knows that his responsibilities as a Jedi keep him bound to the war effort. The burden is made even heavier by the pressure he feels from his mentor, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who pushes him to uphold the Jedi ideals, and from Chancellor Palpatine, who constantly praises him and hints at a greater destiny. While Anakin struggles with these internal conflicts, General Grievous commands the Separatist armies with ruthless efficiency. A fearsome cyborg warrior, Grievous relishes in the chaos of war, leading daring assaults against Republic forces. His unpredictability and brutality have made him a feared figure across the galaxy. With every battle, Grievous pushes the Republic closer to breaking, and the Jedi are stretched thin trying to counter his relentless strategies. As the war rages on, Padme and Anakin find moments of solace in the shadows, away from prying eyes, where they can dream of a future without war, a future where they can live openly and raise a family in peace. But such dreams seem distant as the galaxy spins further into darkness. Forces beyond their understanding are at play, and the delicate balance they have maintained could unravel at any moment. Unbeknownst to them, the war is not the only threat looming. The dark side of the Force stirs, casting its shadow over everything, and soon, decisions will be made that will alter the fate of the galaxy forever. In the shadows of the war-torn galaxy, darker forces move unseen, manipulating events to serve their own twisted ends. Darth Sidious, the elusive Sith Lord pulling the strings of the entire conflict, watches Anakin Skywalker closely. He senses the growing tension within the Jedi, a young man torn between duty and desire. Sidious knows that Anakin's secret love for Padmé Amidala is the key to his undoing, and his ultimate transformation into a Sith. All he needs is to take away what Anakin loves most. In this episode of What If, we will dive deep into how Anakin reacts to Padme being kidnapped by the Separatist leader Grievous holding her beloved wife hostage. How will this change Anakin's trajectory? Will he find hope in the light, or will this plunge Anakin deeper into darkness? Stay tuned in this episode of What If. Before we continue, I want to tell you about this episode's sponsor, Fantasy Sabers. Let me tell you, it is a dream for me to own my own lightsabers. Fantasy Saber makes quality lightsaber with customizable parts that really make me feel like a Jedi, or Sith if I feel a bit naughty that day. But nonetheless, they are one of the best sabers you can find in the market out there. If you're into cosplaying, they have high-quality replicas, and if you just want to mess around with your buddies, they also have their own takes in lightsabers they come up with themselves. Go check them out in the link in the description to get your own saber and live out your fantasy of being in Star Wars right now. Now, back to the story. Meanwhile, General Grievous continues to wreak havoc across the galaxy. Unflinching in his loyalty to the Separatist cause, Grievous has led countless campaigns that have crippled the Republic's military infrastructure. However, despite his successes on the battlefield, his latest orders are not of military nature but far more sinister. Count Dooku, his master, has informed him of a new directive passed down from Darth Sidious himself. Padmé Amidala must be kidnapped. Sidious has calculated every step. He knows that Padmé's abduction will strike directly at Anakin's heart, pushing him further into fear and despair. The Jedi's emotions, volatile and dangerous, have always been kept in check by the strict discipline of the Order. But Sidious recognizes that Anakin's attachment to Padme is both his greatest weakness and a path to his downfall. The fear of losing her will drive him to seek power at any cost, and ultimately to the dark side. Grievous, ever the cunning tactician, sees the potential in such a plot. Not only will it destabilize the Senate by removing one of its most influential members, but it will also strike a psychological blow against the Republic's most formidable Jedi warrior. With relish, Grievous begins to plan the abduction, assembling a strike team of his most elite droids and preparing to launch an attack on Coruscant itself, the heart of the Republic. Unaware of the trap being set, Anakin continues to struggle with his own growing darkness. The war, long and brutal, has taken its toll on him. He is tired of seeing death and destruction, tired of the endless cycle of battle, and more than anything, he is tired of living in constant fear for Padmé's safety. His nightmares, once mere whispers in his mind, have grown more frequent and vivid. In his sleep, he sees visions of Padmé suffering, slipping from his grasp. These dreams haunt him, fueling a possessiveness that he struggles to contain. Each mission that takes him away from her only deepens his anxiety. His thoughts are consumed by worry, and the more he tries to push them aside, the stronger they become. Anakin begins to question the Jedi's teachings more openly. Why should he be asked to deny his feelings, to ignore the very love that gives him strength? Why should he constantly be made to choose between the woman he loves and the duties that have been forced upon him? As the shadows grow longer, Anakin feels the pull of something dark, a whisper in his mind telling him that he can protect her if only he had more power. But at what cost? Soon Grievous will make his move, and the seeds of Anakin's descent will be sown. The negotiations with the neutral systems were meant to be a glimmer of hope for the war-torn galaxy. Senator Padmé Amidala, respected for her diplomacy and tireless advocacy for peace, was at the center of the mission. The Republic believed that if they could convince these unaligned systems to join their cause, it could tip the balance of the war. It was a high-stakes affair, and Padmé's involvement was seen as critical to its success. However, Darth Sidious had foreseen this moment and had set his trap. General Grievous, ever the cold and calculated tactician, launched a daring raid just as the negotiations were underway. His fleet struck swiftly, overwhelming the Republic forces stationed to protect the diplomatic convoy. In the confusion, Grievous and his elite droid commandos captured Padmé and whisked her away aboard his warship. The shock of Padmé's kidnapping reverberated through the Senate and the Republic at large. It was not just a military blow, but a symbolic one. With Padmé taken, the fragile peace talks collapsed, and the neutral systems pulled back, fearful of the chaos surrounding the Republic's leadership. But the greatest impact of all was felt by Anakin Skywalker. The moment he learned of Padmé's abduction, Anakin felt something break inside him. The rage, fear, and helplessness that had simmered within him for so long erupted in a torrent of emotion. In his heart, he could only think of her, her safety, her survival. The war, the Jedi Code, and even his duty to the Republic faded into insignificance compared to the desperation he felt to save her. Anakin rushed to the Jedi Council chambers, demanding that they immediately organize a rescue mission, but the Council, led by Master Yoda and Mace Windu, remained cautious. While they recognized the gravity of Padmé's capture, they were wary of acting rashly, knowing that Grievous had likely laid further traps. Obi-Wan Kenobi, ever the voice of reason, urged Anakin to stay calm, reminding him that fear and anger were paths to the dark side.
"Patience, Anakin,"
Obi-Wan said.
"We will find her. But rushing headlong into danger will only make the situation worse."
But Anakin's patience had long worn thin. Every moment that passed felt like a lifetime. He couldn't shake the images of his nightmares, visions of Padmé in pain, slipping away from him. His breathing quickened, his mind racing. Why was the Council hesitating? Why weren't they treating this with the urgency it deserved? He could not, would not, lose her. Not like this. Against the warnings of the Jedi, Anakin began to form his own plans. His obsession with rescuing Padmé grew uncontrollable, and he was willing to do whatever it took to find her, even if it meant abandoning his other duties as a Jedi. He no longer cared about the wider war or the consequences of his actions. All that mattered was Padmé, and he would stop at nothing to bring her back. The Jedi sensed the dangerous shift in him, but they were unsure of how to handle it. Obi-Wan more than anyone saw the conflict tearing his former apprentice apart. But Anakin was already slipping away, his emotions clouding his judgment. Sidious's plan was working. The fear of losing Padmé was pushing Anakin to the edge, and the dark side whispered to him more strongly than ever. Each step he took to save her drew him closer to the point of no return, and as the shadow of the Sith loomed, Anakin's fate became more uncertain than ever. Anakin Skywalker stood aboard the bridge of the Resolute. His mind was a storm of emotions. Fear for Padmé's safety, anger at Grievous for taking her, and frustration at the Jedi Council for their measured response. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. He clenched his fists, his pulse racing as dark thoughts circled his mind. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Ahsoka Tano, his former apprentice, stood behind him, watching in silence. Both sensed the turmoil within Anakin, but knew there was little they could do to pull him back.
"We'll find her, Anakin,"
Obi-Wan said, his voice calm but tinged with concern.
"But you need to remain focused. Grievous wants you angry. He knows it clouds your judgment."
Anakin exhaled sharply, trying to control his breathing, but his thoughts returned to Padme. She was strong, resourceful, but he knew Grievous's cruelty. The fear of losing her, of seeing his visions come true, gnawed at him.
"We should have found her by now,"
Anakin growled.
"If the Council had acted sooner, if I had acted sooner, this wouldn't have happened."
Ahsoka stepped forward, her voice steady and supportive.
"We'll get her back, Master. But if you let your emotions get the better of you, that's exactly what Grievous wants. We're going to need all our wits about us if we're going to beat him."
Anakin turned, locking eyes with Ahsoka, and for a moment, the old camaraderie flickered in his gaze. He knew she was right, but it didn't lessen the storm raging within him.
"I know, it's just...
His voice dropped.
I can't lose her."
Meanwhile, aboard Grievous's flagship, Padmé Amidala was already working on her escape. Captivity had never been something she tolerated easily. With her hands bound, she still managed to subtly manipulate the control console of her cell. A senator she might be, but her time in the field had taught her how to improvise, and right now, her only hope was to send a signal. Her captors underestimated her resourcefulness, and with each passing moment, she got closer to transmitting a coded distress message. She knew Anakin would come for her, she just had to give him a trail to follow. Grievous, aboard the bridge of his own ship, monitored the situation with cold amusement. Sidious's plan was working perfectly. He had already taunted Anakin through intercepted transmissions, playing on the Jedi's obvious fear and attachment to Padme. Now, all that remained was to draw him into a trap.
"Skywalker will come,"
Grievous muttered to his tactical droid.
"His emotions are already unraveling him. He's too predictable, too weak."
As the Resolute exited hyperspace in the distant system where Grievous was hiding, Anakin's connection to Padme flared. He could sense her, faint but unmistakable, a beacon amidst the darkness. His heart leapt, but the same darkness whispered that it wasn't enough, that he needed more power to protect her, to keep her safe forever. The anger simmered just below the surface. When Obi-Wan noticed the change in Anakin, he gave him a warning look.
"Don't let him get into your head, Anakin. Grievous knows exactly how to push you."
Anakin nodded curtly, but inside, his focus narrowed. He was done waiting, done following protocol. Padme was close, and he would stop at nothing to bring her back, even if it meant going against everything he'd been taught. As their ship approached Grievous's fleet, the Jedi prepared for battle, but for Anakin, the mission was already clear. He was coming for Padme, and nothing, not the war, not the Jedi, and certainly not General Grievous, would stand in his way. The hidden Separatist stronghold loomed ahead, a dark fortress carved into the rocky landscape of a remote, uncharted planet. Anakin Skywalker could feel Padme's presence inside, faint but unmistakable. The Force hummed with intensity as he led a strike team toward the heart of the base, Ahsoka and Obi-Wan at his side. But while his companions remained focused on the mission, Anakin's thoughts were consumed by one goal, finding Padme and making Grievous pay for taking her. As they breached the stronghold's defenses, droid forces swarmed to meet them. Anakin cut through the mechanical soldiers with ruthless efficiency, his lightsaber a blur of blue as it sliced through the opposition. His fury powered every strike, and while Obi-Wan fought with his characteristic calm precision, Anakin's attacks were filled with raw emotion. They reached the central chamber, and there, standing with his back to them, was General Grievous. The towering cyborg commander turned slowly, his yellow eyes gleaming behind his mask.
"Skywalker,"
Grievous rasped, his voice thick with malice.
"I've been waiting for you."
Without a word, Anakin charged, his lightsaber crashing against Grievous's metal claws in a shower of sparks. The battle was fierce, the clash of their weapons echoing through the chamber. Grievous fought with the brutal precision of a machine, but Anakin was relentless, his anger driving him forward. Each swing of his lightsaber was more powerful than the last, fueled by the fear and rage that had been building within him since Padme's capture. Grievous, though formidable, began to falter under the onslaught.
"You're weak, Skywalker,"
he hissed, retreating step by step.
"Your attachment makes you vulnerable."
Anakin's eyes blazed with fury.
"Where is she?"
he shouted, slamming his lightsaber into Grievous's guard, sparks flying as metal met plasma. Grievous grinned, his voice taunting.
"Perhaps she's already dead."
The word sent a shockwave of terror through Anakin's heart. His vision blurred with rage, and he attacked with renewed ferocity, battering Grievous into a corner. With a final devastating strike, Anakin disarmed the cyborg, sending his lightsabers clattering to the ground. He raised his own blade, ready to deliver the killing blow.
"Anakin, no!"
Obi-Wan's voice cut through the haze of anger, but it barely registered. Anakin stood over Grievous, his chest heaving, lightsaber inches from the cyborg's throat. He could feel the power coursing through him, the dark satisfaction of victory. But then, through the torrent of emotion, he heard a voice. Padme's voice, weak but alive.
Anakin.
His breath caught, and in that moment of hesitation, he realized what he had become. The rage, the fury, it had consumed him. He lowered his lightsaber, sparing Grievous's life not out of mercy, but because his focus shifted entirely to Padme. Anakin turned and sprinted toward the chamber where she was being held, leaving Grievous defeated but alive. He found Padme chained inside a holding cell, pale and exhausted but alive. The sight of her filled him with relief, but also with an overwhelming sense of fear. His visions, his nightmares, they still lingered in his mind, warning him that she could be taken from him. He rushed to her side, breaking her chains with a quick slash of his lightsaber. She collapsed into his arms, and for a moment everything else disappeared.
I thought I'd lost you.
Anakin whispered, holding her tightly. Padme looked up at him, sensing the storm within.
Anakin. What's happening to you?
But Anakin didn't answer. The fear of losing her had driven him to the brink, and now, as he held her, he knew that his need to protect her at any cost was pulling him deeper into the darkness. The line between love and possession blurred, and with each step he took, the whispers of the dark side grew louder. The thought of losing Padme terrified him more than anything, and he was willing to do whatever it took to keep her safe, even if it meant turning away from the light. Anakin and Padme's return to Coruscant should have been a moment of relief, a victory after the perilous mission to rescue her. But the consequences of Anakin's actions lingered like a dark cloud over the Republic. The daring raid on Grievous's stronghold, driven by Anakin's obsession with saving Padme, had far-reaching effects. The neutral systems, whose leaders were considering peace talks, were now pulling away from the Republic. The violent confrontation had confirmed their worst fears, that the Republic was unstable, driven by war, and too reckless to be trusted with diplomacy. In the Senate, whispers spread about Anakin's role in the debacle. Padme, aware of the political fallout, was torn between gratitude for her rescue and concern over the larger implications of Anakin's behavior. She could see the toll the mission had taken on him, his growing restlessness, the darkness creeping into his once bright spirit. As a senator, she knew the damage his actions had caused. As his wife, she feared for the man she loved, but Anakin was blinded by his emotions. Though he had saved Padme, the sense of relief was fleeting. The fear that had driven him, the visions of her suffering, the terror of losing her, had not disappeared. They remained lurking beneath the surface, gnawing at him. And now, more than ever, he questioned the Jedi's teachings. How could they expect him to remain detached, to suppress his feelings, when those very emotions had fueled his strength to save the person he loved most? It was in this vulnerable state that Darth Sidious struck. Under the guise of Chancellor Palpatine, Sidious had long been grooming Anakin, feeding him compliments, giving him the attention and validation he craved. Now, with Anakin's fears laid bare, Sidious saw his opportunity.
Anakin,
Sidious said, his voice smooth and filled with concern during a private meeting in his office.
you've done what the Jedi could not. You saved her. But the Jedi will never see it that way, will they? They don't understand the strength that love gives you.
Anakin hesitated, the words hitting him where he was most vulnerable.
They think I'm reckless,
He muttered.
They told me to stay calm, to follow the rules. But if I had listened, Padme would still be in Grievous's hands.
Sidious nodded, his expression sympathetic.
They fear your power, Anakin. They fear what you can become. But I do not. I see your potential, your greatness. You could end this war, bring peace to the galaxy, and protect those you love. But you'll need more than the Jedi's limited teachings. You'll need true power.
The idea gnawed at Anakin, the promise of control, of power over fate itself. It echoed his deepest fears, his desire to keep Padme safe from the visions that haunted him.
But the Jedi, they've been like a family to me. Obi-Wan...
His voice trailed off, torn between loyalty and the growing doubt inside him. Sidious leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper.
The Jedi have betrayed you, Anakin. They ask you to sacrifice everything, your emotions, your attachments. But why should you? They don't understand what you're capable of. Only I can help you protect those you love.
The Chancellor's words resonated deep within Anakin, planting seeds of doubt about the Jedi and stirring a desire for greater power. Sidious had given voice to the thoughts Anakin had been struggling to suppress, and now for the first time Anakin wondered if the Jedi truly understood him at all. As the days passed, the wedge between Anakin and the Jedi Order grew. He began to question their teachings more openly, finding himself increasingly isolated. His frustration with the Order's unwillingness to act decisively in the war and their refusal to acknowledge the power of his emotions fueled his growing resentment. Even his relationship with Obi-Wan became strained as the Jedi Master sensed the darkness closing in on his former apprentice but could not reach him. The path before Anakin was growing darker, and with every step he moved closer to Sidious's waiting grasp. The fear of losing Padme, the promise of power, and the doubts about the Jedi were pulling him into a vortex from which there would be no return. Anakin Skywalker returned from the mission to rescue Padme, a changed man. To the outside world, he remained the hero of the Republic, leading clone troopers into battle with the same unparalleled skill and bravery. But inside, a storm was brewing. His fear of losing Padme, the nightmares that plagued his sleep, and the seductive promise of power whispered by Chancellor Palpatine had begun to shape him into something darker. In the weeks following his return, Anakin's obsession with Padme's safety grew. Every moment she spent away from him filled him with anxiety. He had always loved her deeply, but now that love had morphed into something possessive and desperate. He couldn't stop thinking about the visions, those terrible glimpses of her in pain, slipping away from him. The fear of losing her was becoming unbearable. Padme sensed the change. At first, she had been relieved to be back home, thankful that Anakin had risked everything to save her. But the man she saw before her now was not the same as the one who had fought by her side during the early years of the Clone Wars. His presence was more intense, his emotions more volatile. He was quick to anger, especially when it came to her safety, and he often spoke of the war with a cold, detached pragmatism that unnerved her. One evening in their secret apartment on Coruscant, Padme tried to confront him about his behavior. She watched as Anakin paced the room, his jaw clenched, his eyes distant.
Anakin, I'm worried about you.
She said gently, taking a step closer.
You've been different ever since. Ever since you rescued me.
Anakin stopped, his brow furrowing.
Different? How?
His voice was tight, defensive.
You're more distant.
Padme said, choosing her words carefully.
Angry, maybe. I know you've been through so much, but it's like you're not yourself anymore.
Anakin's eyes flashed with frustration.
I saved you, Padme. I did what the Jedi wouldn't. What's wrong with wanting to protect you? With wanting to make sure you're safe?
Padme reached out to him, her voice pleading.
There's nothing wrong with wanting to protect me, Anakin. But the way you're doing it, the anger, the fear, it's not who you are. I can see the darkness in you and it scares me.
Anakin pulled away, turning his back to her.
You don't understand. I have to protect you. I can't let what I've seen happen. I won't lose you.
Padme's heart ached. She wanted to help him, to pull him back from the edge, but every attempt seemed to push him further away.
Anakin, please, talk to me. We can figure this out together.
But Anakin's mind was already elsewhere. The constant pressure of the war, the secrecy of their marriage, and the manipulations of Palpatine weighed heavily on him. The Chancellor's words echoed in his head, words that promised him the power to prevent the very things he feared most. The Jedi had failed to protect the Republic. They had failed to understand him, but Palpatine believed in him. He understood the importance of control, of ensuring that those he loved would never be harmed. While Anakin struggled with his inner turmoil, General Grievous, though badly injured from their previous battle, survived. His escape from Anakin's grasp allowed him to regroup and continue leading the Separatist forces in key attacks. His failure to capture Padme had only intensified his hatred for Skywalker, and he vowed to finish what he had started. In the shadows, Sidious's plan to corrupt Anakin was advancing perfectly. He knew that Anakin's fear of losing Padme was his greatest weakness, and he fed that fear at every opportunity. Through subtle manipulations, Sidious planted the idea that the Jedi were holding Anakin back, that they were too rigid, too blind to the true power of the Force. With each passing day, the wedge between Anakin and the Jedi Order grew deeper. His distrust of them festered, and his belief in Palpatine's vision of power and control solidified. And Padme, the person he had fought so hard to save, was slipping further from his reach, unable to stop the darkness that was slowly consuming him. Anakin Skywalker had once been a shining symbol of hope for the Jedi Order and the Republic. His strength in battle, his connection to the Force, and his bravery had made him a hero in the Clone Wars. But now, that heroism was tainted. His love for Padme, once pure and powerful, had become a vulnerability, a chain around his soul that Darth Sidious was pulling tighter with each passing day. The kidnapping had marked a turning point, creating a deep and permanent rift between Anakin and the Jedi, a rift that only grew wider. No longer did Anakin feel like he belonged in the Jedi Temple. Every time he walked its halls, surrounded by those he had once called brothers and sisters, he felt their judgment. He felt misunderstood, isolated. They couldn't see what he saw. They didn't understand the depth of his connection to Padme, or the lengths he was willing to go to protect her. The Jedi teachings about detachment, about letting go of attachments, now felt like chains trying to hold him back from his true potential. The Council and even Obi-Wan treated him with caution. They sensed his growing instability, his anger, and his fear. But instead of helping him, Anakin felt they were pushing him away, distrusting him. He believed they were too rigid, too blinded by their own dogma to see what needed to be done to end the war and save the galaxy. And more importantly, they couldn't understand the threat he saw looming over Padme. His visions, those terrible, haunting images of her suffering, continued to plague him, feeding his growing obsession. He had already saved her once, but now he was convinced that it wasn't enough. Only he could protect her from the dangers of the galaxy, and the more the Jedi restrained him, the more he felt they were holding him back from that duty. Padme, meanwhile, began to feel the weight of their forbidden love more than ever. She had once believed that their relationship, though hidden, could survive anything. But now, she saw the strain it was putting on Anakin and the way his love for her had twisted into something dangerous. He was no longer the man she had fallen in love with. His passion had darkened, and his desire to protect her had become an obsession. Every time they met in secret, she could feel his fear, his desperation.
Anakin?
She said one evening, her voice filled with concern as they sat together in the dim light of their apartment.
This isn't what we wanted. You've changed. You're letting your fear consume you.
I have to protect you.
Anakin insisted, his eyes intense as he grasped her hand tightly.
You don't understand, Padme. I've seen things I can't ignore. If I don't stop them, I'll lose you.
Padme's heart ached. She knew Anakin's fear was real, but the lengths he was willing to go frightened her.
I'm not asking you to stop caring, Anakin. But this path you're on, it's not you. The Jedi are trying to help you, but you're pushing them away.
The Jedi don't trust me.
Anakin snapped, his frustration boiling over.
They don't understand what I'm capable of. They're too weak, too afraid to do what's necessary, but I'm not. I can stop this. I can save you.
The darkness in his voice, the absolute certainty in his words, sent a chill through Padme. She could see the seeds of his fall taking root, and though she loved him, she felt powerless to stop it. Anakin's trust in the Jedi was gone, and his belief in the teachings that had once guided him was shattered. Only Palpatine seemed to understand him. Only the Chancellor spoke of the power that could truly save those he loved. And with each passing day, Anakin found himself drawn further into that promise, unable to see that it was pulling him toward the dark side. The seeds of Darth Vader had been planted. Anakin's obsessive need to control the fate of those he loved, particularly Padme, was leading him down a dangerous path, one that, though he could not see it yet, would soon lead to his final betrayal of everything he once held dear.